IELTS Reading Out Loud Day 9. I read out loud IELTS reading sections to improve my speaking skills. Part 1. Flying Turtles. An airborne introduction program has helped conservationists take significant steps to protect the endangered Galapagos tortoise. Forests of spiny cacti cover much of the uneven lave plains that separate the interior of the Galapagos Island from Isabella from the Pacific Ocean. With its 5 distinct volcanoes, the island resembles a lunar landscape. Only the thick vegetation at the skirts of the often cloud-covered peak of the Sierra Negra offers respite from the barren terrain below. This inhospitable environment is home to the giant Galapagos tortoise. Sometime after the Galapagos birth, around 5 million years ago, the islands were colonized by one or more tortoises from mainland South America. As these essential tortoises settled on the individual islands, the different populations adapted to their unique environments, giving rise to at least 14 different subspecies. Iceland life agreed with them. In the absence of significant predators, they grew to become the largest and longest living tortoises on the planet, weighing more than 400 kilograms, occasionally exceeding 1.8 meters in length and living for more than a century. Before human arrival, the archipelago's tortoises numbered in the hundreds of thousands. From the 17th century onwards, pirates took a few on board for food, but the arrival of whaling ships in the 1790s saw this exploitation grow exponentially. Relatively immobile and capable of surviving for months without food or water, the tortoises were taken on board these ships. The tortoises were taken on board these ships to act as food supplies during long ocean passages. Sometimes their bodies were processed into high-grade oil. In total, an estimated 200,000 animals were taken from the archipelago before the 20th century. The historical exploitation was then exacerbated when settlers came to the islands. They hunted the tortoises and destroyed their habitat to clear land for agriculture. They also introduced alien species ranging from cattle, pigs, goats, rats, and dogs to plants and ants. And ants that either prey on the eggs and young tortoises or damage or destroy their habitat. Today, only 11 of the original subspecies survive, and of these, several are highly endangered. In 1989, work began on a tortoise breeding center just outside the town of Puerto Villamil on Isabella, dedicated to protecting the island tortoise populations. The center's captive breeding program proved to be extremely successful, and it eventually had to deal with an overpopulation problem. The problem was also a pressing one. Captive-bred tortoises can't be reintroduced into the wild until they are at least 5 years old and weigh at least 4.5 kilograms, at which point their size and weight and their hardened shells are sufficient to protect them from predators. But if people wait too long after that point, the tortoises eventually become too large to transport. For years, repatriation efforts were carried out in small numbers, with the tortoises carried on the backs of men over weeks of long, treacherous hikes along narrow trails. But in November 2010, the environmentalists and Galapagos National Park liaison officer Godfrey Merlin, a visiting private motor yacht captain, and a helicopter pilot gathered around a table in a small cafe in Puerto Ayora on the island of Santa Cruz to work out more ambitious reintroduction. The aim was to use a helicopter to move 300 of the breeding center's churches to various locations close to Sierra Negra. The unprecedented effort was made possible by the owners of the 67-meter yacht Wild Cloud, who provided the Galapagos National Park with free use of their helicopter and its experienced pilot, as well as the logistical support of the yacht, its captain and crew. Originally an air ambulance, the yacht helicopter has a rear double door and a large internal space that's well suited for cargo, so a custom crate was designed to hold up to 33 tortoises with a total weight of about 150 kilograms. This weight, together with that of the fuel, pilot, and 4 crew, approached the helicopter's maximum payload, and there were times when it was clearly right on the edge of the helicopter's capabilities. Oh yeah, right on the edge of the helicopter's capabilities. During a period of 3 days, a group of volunteers from the breeding center worked around the clock to prepare the young tortoises for transport. Meanwhile, park wonders dropped off ahead of time in remote locations, cleared landing sites within the thick brush, cacti, and lava rocks. Upon their release, the juvenile tortoises quickly spread out over their ancestral territory, investigating new surroundings and feeding on the vegetation. Eventually, one tiny tortoise came across a fully grown giant who had been lumbering around the island for around 100 years. The two stood side by side, a powerful symbol of the generation of an ancient species. The intersection of health sciences and geography. While many diseases that affect humans have been eradicated due to improvements in vaccinations and the availability of healthcare, there are still areas around the world where certain health issues are more prevalent. In a world that is far more globalized than ever before, people come into contact with one another through travel and living closer and closer to each other. As a result, superviruses and other infections and resistance to antibiotics are becoming more and more common. Geography can often play a very large role in the health concerns of certain populations. For instance, depending on where you live, you will not have the same health concerns as someone who lives in a different geographical region. Perhaps one of the most obvious examples of this idea is malaria-prone areas, which are usually tropical regions that foster a warm and damp environment in which the mosquitoes that can give people disease can grow. Malaria is much less of a problem in high-altitude deserts, for instance. In some countries, geographical factors influence the health and well-being of the population in very obvious ways. In many large cities, the wind is not strong enough to clear the air of the massive amounts of smog and pollution that cause asthma, lung problems, eyesight issues, and more in the people who live there. Part of the problem is, of course, the massive number of cars being driven, in addition to factories that run on coal power. The rapid industrialization of some countries in recent years has also led to the cutting down of forests to allow for the expansions of big cities, which makes it even harder to find the pollution with the fresh air that is produced by plants. It is in situations like these that the field of health geography comes into its own. It is an increasingly important area of study in a world where diseases like polio are re-emerging, resp- respiratory diseases continue to spread, and malaria-prone areas are still fighting to find a better cure. Health, health geography is the combination of, on the one hand, knowledge regarding geography and method used to analyze and interpret geographical information, and on the other, the study of health, diseases, and healthcare practices around the world. The aim of this hybrid science is to create solutions for common geography-based health problems. While people will always be prone to illness, the study of how geography affects our health could lead to the eradication of certain illnesses and the prevention of others in the future. By understanding why and how we get sick, we can change the way we treat illness and disease specific to certain geographical locations. The geography of disease and ill health analysis the geography of disease and ill health analysis the geography of disease and ill health analyzes the frequency with which certain diseases appear in different parts of the world and overlays the data with the geography of the region to see if there could be a correlation between the two. Health geographers also study factors that could make certain individuals or a population more likely to be taken ill with a specific health concern or disease, as compared with the population of another area. Health geographers in this field are usually trained as healthcare workers and have an understanding of basic epidemiology as it relates to the spread of diseases among the population. Researchers study the interactions between human and their environment that could lead to illness, such as asthma in places with high levels of pollution, and work to create a clear way of categorizing illnesses, disease, and epidemics into local and global scales. Health geographers can map the spread of illness and attempt to identify the reasons behind an increase or decrease in illness as they work to find a way that halts the further spread or re-emergence of diseases in vulnerable populations. The second subcategory of health geography is the geography of healthcare provision. This group studies the availability or lack thereof of healthcare resources to individuals and populations around the world. In both developed and developing nations, there is often a very large discrepancy between the two options available to people in different social classes, income brackets, and levels of education. Individuals working in the area of geography of healthcare provision attempt to assess the levels of healthcare in the area. For instance, it may be very difficult for people to get medical attention because there is a mountain between their village and the nearest hospital. The researchers are on the front line of making recommendations regarding policy to international organizations, local government bodies, and others. The field of health geography is often overlooked, but it constitutes a huge area of need in the fields of geography and healthcare. If we can understand how geography affects our health, no matter where in the world we are located, we can better treat disease, prevent illness, and keep people safe and well. Part 3. Music and the emotions. Neuroscientist Jono Laurier considers the emotional power of music. Why does music make us feel? One on the one hand, music is a purely abstract art form, devoid of language or explicit ideas, and yet, even though music says little, it still manages to touch us deeply. When listening to our favorite songs, our body betrays all the symptoms of emotional arousal. The pupils in our eyes dilate, dilate, our pulse and blood pressure rise, the electrical conductance of our skin is lowered, and the cerebellum, a brain region associated with bodily movement, becomes strangely active. Blood is even redirected to the muscles in our legs. In other words, sound stirs us as sound stirs at us. In other words, sound stirs us at our biological roots. A recent paper in Nature Neuroscience by a research team in Montreal, Canada, marks an important step in revealing the precise underpinnings of the potent, pleasurable stimulus that is music. Although the study involves plenty of fancy technology, including functional magnetic resonance imaging (fMRI) and ligand-based positron emission tomography (PET) scanning, the experiment itself was rather straightforward. After screening 217 individuals who responded to advertisements requesting people who experienced chills to instrumental music, the scientists narrowed down the subject pool to 10. They then asked the subjects to bring in their playlist of favorite songs. Virtually every genre was represented, from techno to tango, and when played them, the music while their and they then asked the subjects to bring in their playlist of favorite songs. Virtually every genre was presented, from techno to tango, are pl- and played them the music while their brain activity was monitored. Okay, because the scientists were combining methodologies, PET and fMRI, they were able to obtain an impressively exact and detailed portrait of music in the brain. The first thing they discovered is that music triggers the production of dopamine, a chemical with a key role in setting pupils' mood, by the nerve cells in both the dorsal and ventral regions of the brain. As these two regions have long been linked with the experience of pleasure, this finding isn't particularly surprising. What is rather more significant is the finding that the dopamine neurons in the caudate, a region of the brain involved in learning stimulus response associations and in anticipating food and other reward stimuli, were at their most active around 15 seconds before the participants' favorite moments in their music. The researchers called this the anticipatory phase, and argued that the purpose of this activity is to help us predict the arrival of our favorite part. The question, of course, is what all these dopamine neurons are up to. Why are they so active in the period preceding the acoustic climax? After all, we typically associate surges of dopamine with pleasure, with the processing of actual rewards. And yet this cluster of cells is most active when the chills have yet to arrive, when the melodic patterns is still unresolved. One way to answer the question is to look at the music and not the neurons. While music can often seem, at least to the outsiders, like a labyrinth of intricate patterns, It turns out that the most important part of every song or symphony is when the pattern breaks down. Is when the patterns break down, when the sound becomes unpredictable. If the music is too obvious, it is annoyingly boring, like an alarm clock. Like an alarm clock. Numerous studies, after all, have demonstrated that the dopamine neurons quickly adapt to predictable rewards. If we know what's going to happen next, then we don't get excited. This is why composers often introduce a keynote in the beginning of a song, in the beginning of the song, spend most of the rest of the piece in the studious avoidance of the pattern, and then finally repeat it only at the end. The longer we are denied the pattern we expected, the greater the emotional release when the pattern returns, safe and sound. To demonstrate this psychological principle, the musicologist Leonard Meyer, in his classic book Emotion and Meaning in Music, 1956, analyzed the fifth movement in Beethoven's String Quartet in C sharp minor, Op. 131. Meyer wanted to show how music is defined by its flirtation, with, but not submission to, our expectations of order. Meyer dissected 50 measures, bars of the masterpiece, showing how Beethoven begins with the clear statement of a rhythmic and harmonic pattern, and then, with an ingenious tonal dance, carefully holds off repeating it. What Beethoven does instead is suggest variations of the pattern. He wants to preserve an element of uncertainty in his music, making our brains beg for the one chord he refuses to give us. Beethoven saved that chord for the end. According to Meyer, it is the suspenseful tensions of music arising out of our unfulfilled expectation that is the source of the music's feeling, while earlier theories of music focused on the way a sound can refer to the real world of images and experience. Its connotative meaning. Meyer argued that the emotions while earlier theories of music focused on the way a sound can refer to the real world of images and experience, its connotative meaning. Meyer argued that the emotions we find in music come from the unfolding events of the music itself. This embodied meaning arises from the patterns the symphony invokes and then ignores. It is this uncertainty that triggers the surge of dopamine in the caudate as we struggle to figure out what will happen next. We can predict some of the notes, but we can't predict them all, and that is what keeps us listening, waiting expectantly for our rewards, for the pattern to be completed.